Okay, so now here I am in over my head with two people who actually know something. Our visiting victim, grumpy Dr. Jeff McDonald and Mark Tommerdahl, and I'm Bob Dennis. We are the resident grumpy scientists plus one.
And you know, we are bumping up our you can't fix stupid stuff to later because, well, there's a lot. So, and we can't fix it all. So we'll.
And who would want to? Because stupid is sometimes so entertaining. You got to keep a little bit of it just to,
But this might be quasi intellectually simulating.
This is kind of sciencey. Warning, rated S for science.
We'll introduce Jeff by way of saying, okay, you're on stage. Tell us what you do and what metabolomics are.
All right. So I do metabolomics. I run the metabolomics core here at this.
What the hell are metabolomics?
So it's looking at all the small molecules in a biosystem under 1,000, 2,000 kilodalton or Daltons. So small molecules, glucose and stuff like that, and then trying to relate that to metabolism and the effect of different diseases, and one of which was diabetes that you had mentioned. That really intrigued me because this has been looked at for ages, type 2 diabetes, and they usually think of it as a pancreas liver issue and in terms of secreting insulin, and you don't think of it as the brains being related to the brain at all. And so
so how do you think places in the brain can have 10 to 100 times more insulin in some places than the bloodstream?
Oh, I know.
Oh, how do you know?
Pick me, Professor.
Okay, well, we'll ask
you. Do you want to answer, Jeff? You can answer.
It was news to me.
It was news to me too.
I'm a liver person,
and I just don't know anything. So Mark actually told both of us that the brain produces its own insulin, which has been known. It's been published in 2011, so it's been known before that.
Obviously, a cell called the neurogliaform cell.
Neurogliaform cells make insulin, so it's not just your pancreas.
Actually an inhibitory cell with a lot of special properties.
It's not just your pancreas; it's your brain. And you might remember that Mark and I discussed the diving reflex. How the diving reflex is true for all air-breathing vertebrates, right? And what it means is that if you get water splashed on your face and wetness and coldness,
mammals.
Well, it turns out I checked because I didn't know. It's all air-breathing vertebrates show this to some extent. Babies at 6-month-old babies, right? The diving reflex. So what is a diving reflex? That your brain gets some sensation that's picked up. It's actually in your carotid chemoreceptors, which I also didn't know, but it sounds smart because now I know because I looked it up right after the fact. But your brain says, whoa, I'm going underwater, so okay. Executive decision here. All that matters is the brain and the heart. Everything else, you're on your own, right? So the brain has the power to change your, endocrine, circulatory. Just it does. The diving response is all the things your brain and your heart do to starve the rest of the body to keep the brain and the heart alive.
This is the beauty of being a systems physiologist, is because you think of things in terms of the big picture, and then you look for the details that fit what the story you're telling.
Right. So like, Mark and I are systems physiologists. Jeff is more of a molecule guy. I still like him anyway. Yeah, because he actually sees it because he knows about the big picture. But the point here is, so as he's ciphering the multimedia command and control center, I'll just say that this is of interest to us because now we're talking about a complex system level, like a metabolism is a complex system level thing, right? This is a complex system level interaction between the brain and the pancreas and the rest of the body, and it all focuses on insulin.
Yeah, so
he's
like a real professor, so he draws stuff on the board and you can read it.
Not this chicken scratch from Mr. Grumpy over here. You notice I don't write anything because it's awful.
This is insulin, and in type 2 diabetes, insulin before type 2 diabetes, usually insulin secreted after you eat something, and it's secreted by the pancreas, and what happens is the glucose will come in here, cause an increase in metabolism, ATP and redox increases, and that causes the little balls of insulin to be secreted from the beta cells, and that comes out, and it's supposed to work on muscle by pushing the glucose transporter to the membrane and bringing in more glucose. So
that's your insulin sensitivity, right? So
yeah, so you
certain amount of insulin has a certain response that allows easier transport of glucose into the cell. And with type 2 diabetes,
it's less sensitive. It's resistant to that. And
so the same amount of insulin's not having the same effect on cells taking in glucose.
And you have to secrete more insulin, and so you get these shots. So what Mark had mentioned to me is that at the same time, the brain has about 3 times more insulin than the actual bloodstream, and so the brain thinks you're fine. There's no issue with not enough insulin.
Right.
And there's a blood-brain barrier there that insulin won't pass anyway, right? Is that right?
No,
it does.
Well, that's what
was what they used to say.
Sort of what everybody thought, but it does cross.
Some guy said it once, and that became the accepted dogma.
That was me. I just said that.
His fault. So somebody much more big and influential than any of us said, no, it can't be.
Couldn't be that.
So
no, but the neurogliaform cells are cells that have, like I mentioned, very special properties that actually, because they're the only class of cells that are doing this, and they do these specific functions, we can actually measure it, and it's a measure that we call feed-forward inhibition, and it basically feed-forward. It's sort of like if I stimulate something here, it's going to go ahead and inhibit up there, and so if there's a linear path where something jumps ahead and turns things off before the signal gets there, kind of smart. But if you get those cells hyperactive, like if they start producing, all of a sudden the brain needs a lot of insulin because, well, it's not getting insulin from somewhere else, then it starts generating more insulin in the brain, and also the feed-forward inhibition metric actually goes up well above normal. And so that's what we found in the diabetics who are just beginning to get diabetes.
So in the diabetic brain, in type 2 diabetic brain, is it possible that the brain is actually modulating the insulin sensitivity in the rest of the body?
Well, this will be up for debate amongst diabetes researchers, but the answer
when they finally figure out that something like this is happening.
The brain has nothing to do with insulin levels. And I was like,
the brain doesn't.
Actually, there's quite a few papers that say it does.
Right.
And again, brain scientists don't talk to diabetes guys, but it does look like there's some feedback loops from levels of insulin in the brain actually do have something to do with levels of insulin in being maintained in the bloodstream. So that's kind of an interesting thing, or levels of insulin that's being produced.
So how does the dive reflex amount to this? Well, insulin being critical to control based upon what's your blood glucose level is very important. One can imagine, at least I can imagine, an instance in which the brain would exert control for its own short-term survival, right? And one can imagine a case in which that exerted control could become a chronic maladaptation.
You can sort of assume that the brain's connected to everything.
Yeah, I wonder what the mechanism in the neurogliaform cells, or
neurogliaform cells. The mechanism is
for insulin secretion.
The molecular mechanism. I have no idea what molecular stuff is.
But, well, it'd be interesting to know if it's conserved between the pancreas and the neurogliaform cells, and it would be really interesting to know if it was actually built by a different mechanism, because then they're conserving the molecule, but they would have developed 2 different mechanisms to make it, telling you something about how important that molecule is.
Like fructose, it doesn't induce the insulinic response as much as
I'm not aware of how localized that response is to different parts of the brain.
Yeah.
And whether different parts of the brain generate more insulin, but I do know that there's feedback loops in other parts.
Are they everywhere?
Like hypothalamus, where that has downstream influence on blood levels. So
are they found everywhere, the neurogliaform cells?
Everywhere in the cortex that I know about.
So there it is. Well,
that's a lot.
Yeah.
That was scientific. Not much grumpiness in there.
Not really. I mean, it's science. It's actually cool science that nobody seems to be suppressing. They're just ignoring it.
Like I'm talking about the fact that the diabetes researchers didn't believe you when you told them.
Well, they actually, in their defense, they were like, no. And I said, yeah. And they're like, no. And I said, yeah, you want to see some papers? Okay. So they actually were like, yeah, you're right. So that rather than disparaging the papers as you must have typed these up last night or something, they were actually like, a little bit open to, there's something huge in your own field.
It'd be interesting if it, if it's before actually the symptoms from the.
Well, that's
sort of
thing. It's like
what I
what's
postulated
driving
in one of our papers was that this actually could precede it. It could be a disruption in the brain circuitry that actually leads to, and leads to the hyper levels of insulin because of the multifaceted thing going on with the neurogliaform cell. You can have increased activity because of something else, but increased feed-forward inhibition to suppress something else. Yeah. And the feed-forward inhibition actually has a lot to do with cognitive circuitry too. So I mean, there's cognitive deficits.
It may be tied into the. It may simply be tied into the metabolism of the brain. I mean, you know, is it trying to burn glucose or trying to burn ketones?
But you can think of all these things as a cascade of events that sort of get out of control. Yeah. Maladaptive.
Maladaptive.
You know, it's like you remember Peter. He did the study on the DTs you get after drinking. So the only thing that you can die from by withdrawing is actually alcohol. And the GABA, they give you benzodiazepines to calm you down. Yep. And so we found that, talking about maladaptation, that the brain metabolizes acetate which is the end product of ethanol, and uses it as an energy source. It's metabolized in the glial.
Know that.
Yeah, it's only metabolized in the glial cells, and then it's transported to the neurons. And and then the thing is that it forms glutamate, but then it takes a whole nother step to form GABA. So our hypothesis was that when you come off of alcohol, if you're drinking it all the time, your brain starts relying on it.
You can't switch metabolic pathways fast enough.
No, the GABA gets limiting.
Oh, it gets limiting.
So
because you get used to bringing in GABA from the alcohol, and then all of a sudden you quit drinking and you don't have GABA, so because you've been drinking it before, and the GABA levels have to start.
So as opposed to it being a metabolic byproduct of the current fuel source, it just gets cut off.
Yeah.
Now, originally,
one
the way they
step
treated
of metabolism
that,
for that from
the original way that was treated with benzodiazepines, like you mentioned, but then people got addicted to benzodiazepines, and so now they're trying to deal with baclofen, which is a GABA B agonist, which doesn't seem to have. I mean,
and there's no placebo effect on that. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that really
right.
I mean, it's got to work, right?
Well, that is very, very interesting. I learned something today about the metabolic agility of the brain.
Yeah,
it's got a bunch of different ways to find fuel.
That's the harmony of cross-fertilization of metabolism people with system biologists and engineers. And
we should get an evolutionary biologist in here to talk about, the brain just adapts to whatever culture they're in terms of what they get to eat and what they metabolize. So
absolutely. Well, I think that's probably all the time we have.
Do you have any ethanol?
Or maybe not. Any beers? You didn't ask at the right time. However, when we sign out, maybe we can find you a beer.
Oh, cool.
That'd be kind of cool. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. And it seems like we're going to be having a few more beers here in a minute, but you won't be watching us.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.